There is a machine out there right now, further from home than anything human hands have ever built, and it is running out of power at a rate you could measure with a kitchen scale, 4 watts a year. That's it. That's the number quietly deciding the fate of the most important spacecraft in the history of space exploration. Its computer is weaker than the device sitting in your pocket. Its radio signal, by the time it reaches Earth, is so faint that engineers have to dig it out of the background noise of the universe using some of the most sensitive receivers ever constructed. And when that spacecraft finally does speak to us, the conversation is already old. 23 hours old, in fact, because that's how long it takes a signal to cross the 15 billion miles separating it from the people who built it. This is Voyager 1, and what's happening to it right now in 2026 is not the story you've heard before. Most people know the outline. Spacecraft launched in the 70s, flew past a couple of planets, took some famous pictures, disappeared into the dark. That version isn't wrong exactly. It's just incomplete in almost every way that matters. It skips the near decade-long argument over a single photograph. It skips the engineers who, just months ago, came within a fraction of losing the spacecraft entirely. It skips the fact that instruments which ran flawlessly for 49 years are now being switched off permanently, one by one. Not because they broke, but because there isn't enough electricity left to keep them warm. And it skips the real question sitting underneath all of it, the one nobody at NASA can fully answer yet. When Voyager 1 finally goes silent sometime in the 2030s if the engineers get their wish, what exactly will humanity have lost? To understand where things stand this summer, you have to go back to where this machine actually began, because the distance between its original assignment and what it's actually accomplished is the whole reason this story matters. On September 5th, 1977, a spacecraft roughly the size of a small car lifted off from Cape Canaveral on a Titan Centaur rocket, aimed at the outer solar system. The mission plan called for 5 years of work. 5 years to fly past Jupiter and Saturn, gather data, and wrap up. Nobody in that control room, not one engineer, not one scientist, was planning for what this machine would still be doing 49 years later. Voyager 1 wasn't built for a multi-decade odyssey into interstellar space. It was built to look at 2 gas giants and come home with pictures, and it did exactly that, brilliantly. In March 1979, it swept past Jupiter and caught something no telescope on Earth had ever seen: active volcanoes erupting on the moon Io. It photographed Jupiter's storm systems in detail sharp enough to rewrite textbooks. By November 1980, it had reached Saturn, sending back the closest, clearest images of the ring system humanity had ever possessed. And with that, technically, the mission was complete. Everything that has happened in the 45 years since then, every discovery, every reading, every whispered signal across the growing dark, has been extra. Except extra doesn't really capture it. 45 additional years of continuous operation isn't a bonus round. It's an entirely different story, written by a spacecraft that was never designed to write it. Here's where the story most people never hear actually begins. After Saturn, Voyager 1's cameras were still working, still functional, but pointed at nothing in particular, racing outward at roughly 38,000 miles per hour with no more planets left to photograph. Mission planners debated what to do with them before eventually shutting them down for good. And one scientist on the imaging team refused to let that happen quietly. Carl Sagan had an idea he'd been carrying since 1980, before those cameras closed forever turned them around. Not toward another planet, toward home. He wanted a photograph of Earth taken from the edge of the solar system. Almost nobody agreed with him. There were real engineering concerns. Pointing a camera anywhere near the direction of the sun risked frying the imaging system permanently, along with scheduling conflicts and resource fights that dragged on for nearly a decade. The idea sat in limbo until 1989, 9 years after Sagan first proposed it, when NASA finally approved the shot, and even then it only happened because the agency's administrator at the time, Richard Truly, personally stepped in to make sure it got done before the cameras went dark for good. On February 14, 1990, the command finally went out. Voyager 1 warmed its cameras and photographed the solar system one last time, capturing 6 planets in 60 total frames: Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, and Earth. Mercury and Mars were lost in the sun's glare. Among those 60 images was one that would go on to become arguably the most philosophically significant photograph ever taken. From 3.7 billion miles away, Earth appeared as a single pale blue dot caught in a scattered beam of sunlight. Every person who has ever lived, every civilization, every war, every song, every act of love or cruelty in the entire span of recorded history, all of it, contained in 0.12 of 1 pixel, not even a full pixel, a fraction of one. 34 minutes after that shutter closed, Voyager 1 powered its cameras off forever. That's the detail that actually makes this story land, not the image itself, extraordinary as it is, but the timing. If Sagan hadn't spent 9 years pushing for it, if truly hadn't intervened at the last possible moment, if the command had simply arrived 35 minutes later, the most famous photograph in the history of space exploration would never have existed at all. It came within half an hour of being lost entirely, but the cameras going dark wasn't the ending. It turns out it was barely the middle of the story. Voyager 1 kept going. 10 separate instrument packages continued measuring cosmic rays, plasma waves, magnetic fields, pushing the spacecraft deeper into the outer solar system and eventually clear out of it. In August 2012, it crossed the heliopause, the boundary where the sun's magnetic influence gives way to true interstellar space, becoming the first human-made object in history to leave the solar system entirely, and it was still transmitting data the whole time. What's easy to miss is just how singular that fact remains today. Voyager 1 is the only operating spacecraft in interstellar space, not one of several, the only one. Its twin, Voyager 2, followed it out along a different trajectory in 2018. Together, these two machines provide the only direct in-place measurements humanity has ever collected from the space between star systems. Not models, not telescope estimates, actual instruments physically sitting out there taking readings. There's no replacement mission waiting in orbit. Nothing scheduled to reach interstellar space for decades. When these two machines fall silent, that window of direct measurement closes, and it may not reopen in most of our lifetimes. Which brings us to exactly where things stand right now, and why this year matters so much. Voyager 1 runs on a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, essentially a device converting the heat of decaying plutonium into electricity. There's no solar power involved and no way to recharge it. That plutonium has been decaying steadily since 1977, and the mission loses about 4 watts of available electricity every single year because of it. 4 watts sounds almost meaningless. On Earth, that's a nightlight. On Voyager 1, 4 watts is the line between an instrument staying alive and going permanently dark. NASA didn't arrive at this moment unprepared. Years ago, the engineering and science team sat down and mapped out in advance the exact order in which instruments would be sacrificed as power ran out, a deliberate triage built to squeeze the most valuable science out of every remaining watt. Of the 10 original instrument sets, 7 are already gone. The cameras went first, back in 1990. The planetary spectrometers followed over the years after that. The cosmic ray subsystem was shut down on February 25, 2025. And most recently, on April 17, 2026, NASA sent a command that took 23 hours to reach the spacecraft, deactivating the low-energy charged particles instrument, the LECP, which had been running almost continuously since launch in 1977. Sit with that for a second. An instrument operated flawlessly for 49 years, and then it was switched off, not because it broke, because there simply weren't enough watts left to keep it running without threatening everything else still alive on board. According to Kareem Badruddin, the Voyager mission manager at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the decision followed a routine roll maneuver in late February 2026 that caused a power drop nearly severe enough to trigger the spacecraft's undervoltage fault protection, the system that would have forced Voyager into a defensive safe mode. The team came within a fraction of losing control of the spacecraft outright. Shutting down the LECP was how they pulled it back from that edge. And here's where things shift from a story of slow decline into something more interesting. What remains on Voyager 1 isn't a dying machine stumbling toward silence. It's a deliberately engineered survival. 2 instruments are still operating, the magnetometer, reading magnetic field conditions in a region of space no other active instrument can access, and the plasma wave subsystem, mapping the density and behavior of the ionized gas Voyager is currently moving through. Both are irreplaceable, in the most literal sense. There is nothing else anywhere measuring what they're measuring, in the place they're measuring it. And the engineers aren't just watching the clock. There's an active plan, one the team has unofficially nicknamed the Big Bang, a coordinated overhaul that would swap several onboard systems for lower power alternatives in a single compressed operation. If it works, it could free up enough electricity not only to extend the mission, but potentially, and this is the part that still sounds almost implausible, to bring the LECP back online after it was just shut down. The procedure is being tested first on Voyager 2, which has a bit more spare power and sits closer to Earth, making it the safer test case, with trials run in May and June of 2026. If those succeed, NASA plans to attempt the same fix on Voyager 1 no earlier than July of this year. Nothing about it is guaranteed. Nothing about this mission ever has been. Meanwhile, the spacecraft keeps moving, currently about 15.8 billion miles from Earth and gaining roughly 38,000 miles every hour. On November 18, 2026, it will cross a threshold no human-made object has ever reached, 1 full light day from home. From that point on, the signal Voyager 1 sends back, already weaker than a refrigerator light bulb by the time it reaches Earth, will take a full 24 hours traveling at the speed of light just to arrive. Even the ground infrastructure receiving that signal is more fragile than most people realize. Deep Space Station 43 in Canberra, Australia, is the only antenna on the planet capable of sending commands to both Voyager spacecraft, not one of several, the only one. Between May 2025 and February 2026, it was offline for major structural upgrades, with only limited windows of operation in August and December. For most of 9 months, humanity's ability to send new instructions to its most distant machine was severely limited. One antenna's maintenance schedule, and the difference between intervening in a crisis or simply watching it happen, turns out to be uncomfortably thin. There's another layer to this story that rarely gets the attention it deserves. Bolted to the outside of both Voyager spacecraft is a gold-plated copper disc 12 inches across, carrying 115 photographs, scientific diagrams, recordings of music from across human cultures, natural sounds, and greetings spoken in 55 languages. The golden record, curated by Carl Sagan and his team, wasn't built for any audience alive today. It was built for whoever or whatever might encounter it tens of thousands of years from now. In roughly 40,172 years, based on calculated trajectory rather than guesswork, Voyager 1 will pass within 1.7 light-years of an obscure star in the constellation Ursa Minor. Whether anything is there to find, it is completely unknown. Whether the disk would even survive in readable condition after that much time is uncertain too. Sagan sent it anyway, on the belief that the act of reaching out mattered, even without any certainty that someone would be listening on the other end. The spacecraft carrying that message into deep time is currently kept alive by 2 instruments and an engineering transmitter, all powered by the decay of plutonium loaded aboard 49 years ago. This isn't chaos. It's the intersection of extraordinary longevity and the unforgiving math of power loss. What makes this moment genuinely different from every earlier crisis in Voyager's long history is that there's no more room for trade-offs. For decades, each shutdown bought time somewhere else. Lose one instrument, extend another. That math has run out. From here forward, every shutdown is a subtraction with nothing gained in return. When the magnetometer eventually goes dark, nothing will remain to measure what it was measuring. When the plasma wave subsystem stops transmitting, the only acoustic picture humanity has ever had of interstellar space falls permanently silent. JPL engineers say they're hoping to keep at least one science instrument alive on each Voyager into the 2030s. But they're equally clear that an unexpected fault, a frozen circuit, a thruster failure, a power dip that trips the fault protection before Earth even has time to respond, could shorten that window without warning, because once an instrument shuts off for good, its heaters go with it. In the absolute cold of interstellar space, the electronics simply freeze. There's no dramatic failure, no restart. The hardware just goes quiet and stays that way. Former Voyager project manager John Cassani summed it up plainly in a 2024 NASA statement. They weren't designed to last 30 or 40 years. They were designed not to fail. Nearly 50 years in, that philosophy is still holding. But the physics is winning anyway. The plutonium keeps decaying. The 4 watts keep vanishing year after year with no possibility of reversal. Eventually, the list of instruments left to sacrifice reaches its final entry. When that day comes, Voyager 1 probably won't vanish instantly. The transmitter and onboard computer may keep running a little longer, sending back nothing but engineering telemetry, the digital equivalent of a pulse with nothing left to say. The Deep Space Network will keep listening until the signal finally drops below the edge of detection, and then there will be silence. Not the silence of failure, the silence of completion from a machine that was asked to work for 5 years and instead spent nearly half a century doing science in places no human instrument had ever touched, surviving power crises and computer glitches and thruster wear and the cold, patient math of radioactive decay before finally running out of the last few watts it needed to keep speaking. So what does that actually mean for us? Right now, in the summer of 2026, the 2 Voyager probes are the only direct sensing capability humanity has beyond the edge of the solar system. Nothing is currently en route to replace them. Nothing is scheduled to reach interstellar space for another 20 to 30 years at the earliest. The readings still coming from that magnetometer and that plasma wave subsystem, live data from actual instruments sitting in interstellar space, won't exist again from any spacecraft for a generation, maybe longer. Every day those 2 instruments keep transmitting is a day of genuinely irreplaceable science, because the machine collecting it is sliding further into a darkness it will never return from, and somewhere out past 15 billion miles, still attached to the outside of that dying spacecraft, is a small golden record carrying a photograph of a sunrise, a mother nursing her child, the United Nations building lit up at night, along with music, the sound of wind and rain and ocean surf, and greetings spoken in 55 human languages. In about 40,000 years, it might drift close enough to a star for something, hypothetically, to find it. But long before that, maybe within a few years, maybe by the end of this decade, the spacecraft carrying it will stop talking to us altogether. Its last instruments will go dark. The signal will fade below the noise floor. And the longest-running conversation humanity has ever had with the universe will simply end. The question nobody at JPL can fully answer, the one sitting quietly underneath every power budget they draw up, is whether that ending is a triumph or a warning. Is Voyager 1 proof that human engineering can outlast its own expectations by an order of magnitude nobody predicted? Or is it a reminder that even our furthest reach, 15 billion miles, 49 years, the very boundary of interstellar space, still amounts to something close to a single step on a road with no visible end? Right now, the Big Bang fix is being tested, the magnetometer is still reading, the plasma wave subsystem is still listening, the signal is still making its 23-hour crossing to Earth, and the power is still falling, 4 watts a year, without exception, without pause, without any possibility of reversing course. Somewhere in that simple, stubborn arithmetic is the answer to a question most people never think to ask. How much time does humanity's furthest outpost actually have left? The engineers are hoping for the 2030s. The physics, as it always does eventually, will have the final word. If stories like this, the ones about what it actually takes to reach beyond ourselves, are the kind of thing you find yourself thinking about long after the video ends, consider sticking around. Subscribe if you want more of these, and let me know down in the comments what you think humanity should send next.